No. Alright, thanks for watching the video. Please make sure to smash the like button, hit subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, all the stuff that YouTubers usually do. Well, I thought that conclusion was a bit boring, and I still wanted to do a challenge run of Trails of Cold Steel 3 on Nightmare difficulty. I hadn't really done something like this before, so I didn't want it to be too difficult, and I just decided to relax the requirements for no Master Quartz run to the point that it actually becomes possible. Rather than forbid Master Quartz use completely, I'd allow it for characters who have fixed Master Quartz, mostly guest characters. If possible, I tried to form a party without those characters and avoided their brave orders, but if I couldn't, then I used guests in the active party even when they had a fixed Master Quartz. The challenge might seem easy now, but I don't want to understate it either. Master Quartzes can usually be avoided, and not using them is a pretty harsh constraint. They hugely boost arts damage and defense, give small but noticeable boosts to every other stat, and provide powerful unique abilities and effects such as an enormous increase in counter damage, EP recovery proportional to arts damage, immunity to all status effects, making items multi-targeting, reviving twice per battle, and many more. From early on, the game lets each character equip a secondary Master Quartz for even greater utility. In a regular playthrough of the game, Master Quartz would be central to each character's build. You might ask why I don't mod the game to remove Master Quartz of guest characters. Unfortunately, I can't run the game on PC because my laptop is a literal potato, figuratively speaking. If the rules don't satisfy you, I invite you to try it yourself and do it better. In the rest of the video, I will explain how I defeated the most interesting bosses while following the rules outlined just now. In the interest of time, I will skip several fights and leave out details for the rest. If you want to see a fight in its entirety or see the exact party setup, I made a collection of videos with every story fight uncut. I also made a spreadsheet listing every boss fight, including some stats and strategies. You can find links to that and more below the video. After the section at Juno Naval Fortress, the prologue continued at Einhalb Keep in Leaves. There, the game forced me to equip a Master Quartz. I did that and promptly removed all of them again. Then Rean took off his glasses, and I promptly had him wear them again. Prepared like this, the first mandatory fight was surprisingly easy. Just hitting the monsters a few times was enough.
Let's go. Behold the Vander style.
The next fight was a bit tricky as the monsters had high defense, and the only art at my disposal was Silver Thorn. Fortunately, this art inflicts confusion, as every player of Trails in the Sky will be intimately familiar with. After casting it, they hit each other instead of Rean's team, and finishing off the survivor wasn't too difficult.
Is that all?
A few uneventful fights later, they faced the first big monster, joined by some friends. I kept everyone alive with some healing items and arts.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Kept attacking with crafts, normal attacks and link attacks.
Now, Kurt, go.
Leave it to me.
And was eventually able to win.
Is that all?
After the fight, the big one revived, and Rean remembered that he has an S-craft.
My blade, calm as still water. Now! Ha! Seventh slash! Fallen leaves! This is the blade of the 8 leaves.
Shortly after, Rean's team faced the first actual boss. Magic Knight Direwolf. At this point I had very few tools at my disposal. Only a few quartzes and augment slots, no notable equipment, a limited selection of crafts, no S-craft but Rean's, and only his Brave Order's Iron Will and Raging Fire. This made the boss the hardest of the run. It took a lot of care to defeat it. I had to spread out everyone, so its area of effect attacks would only hit 1 or 2 characters at most. I had to impede its strong attacks or use a turn to move out of the way. I had to use Rean's Iron Will formation and Altina's detector data to reduce damage.
Scan complete.
Meanwhile, I had to attack to deal damage and restore BP. I had to keep everyone's health up through arts, items and Altina's Argem heal. Eventually I got its HP down to below 50% and it entered its enhanced state, also healing for 30%. Rean survived the onslaught thanks to the selfless sacrifice of his students, and was able to revive them again with Thelas and some items.
Thank you.
After whittling down the boss's HP again for around 5 minutes, Rean was able to finish it off with his S-craft, which would become the main form of damage during the run. Since the final boss of the prologue was quite tricky and even earlier enemies were posing a challenge, I decided that I wanted better accessories. For that I needed Mira, which is notoriously scarce. This run was not planned very far ahead, so I decided to spend a few hours making food as Rean. The first available recipe is chunky potato salad. All ingredients can be bought for 100 Mira in batches of up to 99 at a time. There's a chance of about 80% for Rean to turn these ingredients into a dish that sells for 125 Mira, and he will otherwise make a dish that sells for 100 Mira. That means it's possible to get an average profit of 20 Mira with no risk. A few hours later, Rean had made more food than Old Man Rod could possibly eat or sell and gotten 2 million Mira in return. This money lasted comfortably until the end of chapter 3, though if I had planned ahead, it probably could have been more than enough for the whole game. I spent a lot of it immediately on fishing rod upgrades, accessories and consumables. I also fished for around 5 hours to get U materials, Mirage Seepith and Vitality droplets. I didn't use the Vitality droplets yet, but I traded most U materials for equipment, namely 2 Passionate Rouges, Evergreens, Deep Ochres, Still Blues and some Holy Symbols. Holy Symbols helped out a lot in the early game because they add 1000 HP and 5 speed. Evergreens were vital in specific circumstances and Passionate Rouges were by far the most important of these items. In the early game they increased damage by 60% and more when coupled with buffs. Since buffs and combat boni stack multiplicatively with strength, a 200 CP craft with buffed strength and damage boosting Brave Order would almost always be the most efficient way to deal damage. Saintly Force is an extremely useful art for this reason, and I made a few quartzes with the Mirage Seepith from fishing. On the other hand, debuffs don't matter much and last at most 1 turn on bosses, so I usually didn't use them after Direwolf. With that out of the way, Rean, Millium and Altina were ready to tackle Einhell Keep's level 1. Millium had a fixed Master Quartz which I didn't make use of. Rean buffed with Saintly Force and Millium both performed their S-craft on the level boss, and Altina dealt the remaining 9 HP damage. Easy. The first field exercise took the branch campus to the Sutherland province, and Class 7 encountered the first wild monster deep in Istmir Forest, where they were assaulted by 3 spiders. This fight was the hardest of the run, because it started as an ambush, the spiders did a lot of damage, and could inflict all kinds of status effects and debuffs. In response, I decided to nuke them with S-Crafts instead of fighting fairly.
Is that all?
Next up, Class 7 walked around a lot and encountered 3 groups of archaisms: Phalanx J9, Zephyrantes and Balance Clowns. All 3 of them were easily dealt with using S-Crafts. At night, Shirley and Duvalie decided to attack the camp. Class 7 decided to respond with, you guessed it, S-Crafts. For this section it was important to make enough CP recovery food beforehand to use in between the fights, and I always made sure to have some around afterwards as well.
This is the Blade of the 8 Leaves.
The next morning, new Class 7 got benched. In their stead, Laura, Fee and Elliot joined Reen. They killed a few monsters and destroyed archaisms on the way to Hamel with S-Crafts, and were joined by Agate, whom I never used as he had a fixed Master Quartz. After a friendly chat with Shirley and Duvalie, the hardest boss fight of the playthrough awaited. Shirley, Duvalie and the Sleipnir units were fast, did a lot of damage, and could inflict fire, freeze and seal. I spent a few turns scanning them all and was defeated shortly after.
Sorry, everyone.
After restarting the fight, I used Elliot's Blue Orchestra order for damage reduction while setting up buffs with Saintly Force and food items, and then switched to Laura's Valiant Heart. 3 S-Crafts later, the battle was won.
Now for the soul of our Little group sail!
Radiant Phoenix.
Flash! Fallen Leaves!
Not bad.
Everyone played around with their lords for a bit, then Ouroboros left saying some cryptic lines, bringing an end to the first field exercise. On the free day of the chapter, Reen and Laura visited Einhell Keep without much trouble. Afterwards, Aurelia challenged Reen to a duel.
Come.
This fight was the hardest of the play. I finally used Shining to evade half of her attacks, Earth Pulse to replenish HP passively, and prevented her buff and S-Craft with a well-timed S-Craft by Reen.
Calm as still
In retrospect, I could have probably stacked Evergreens to up Reen's evasion probability and used Adamantine Shield to counter her S-Craft, but the described tactics also worked. After the 10th try or so at least.
Sorry, everyone.
Next, new Class 7 tackled Einhell Keep's level 2. The boss Stratos Diver hit hard, but was somewhat susceptible to seal. I experimented with the failed Juicy Ham Sandwich, which can inflict that status effect, but the probability was too low to be useful. In the end, I defeated it with the Sledgehammer Windblade technique. This worked by first breaking the opponent with an appropriately buffed S-Craft under the influence of the Sledgehammer order. Then Windblade was used to force-feed CP recovery items to the S-Breaker, while attacking the broken enemy to restore BP with link attacks. Once the opponent recovered, the cycle repeated as often as necessary. This technique can be used to defeat most bosses in the game and indeed would become the staple of Chapter 2. But it also requires grinding for monster ingredients to make CP recovery food, so it's not perfect by any means. The second field exercise took place in Crossbell. New Class 7 first visited the Geofront with Tio, whom I wasn't allowed to use in battle as she had a fixed Master Quartz. At the end, the Armored Magic Knight Heavy Ruby awaited. Fighting fairly, it would have been the hardest boss fight of the play. It had incredible healing power, but the Sledgehammer Windblade technique worked well enough. In the afternoon, they fought 2 cryptids, Sea Ancerta and Mordrean. They too were extremely powerful, but still couldn't handle the Sledgehammer Windblade technique. Later that day, new Class 7 attended a party at Orcus Tower, which was assaulted by Ouroboros for no apparent reason. New Class 7, now including Musa and Ash, had to fight Enforcer number 0, Campanella the Fool.
Show me what
Musa
you
and
can
Ash
do.
had fixed Master Quartzes, so I could use only one of them and had to use Yuna, Kurt and Altina. I decided to go with Ash for physical damage. He and Yuna were the dedicated attackers, while Altina and Kurt would constantly cast Crescent Mirror, which gave everyone the Arts Reflect status. Since Campanella's attacks inflicted only arts damage, this made the team almost invincible. Campanella also had a craft where the next attack targeting him hit one of the new Class 7 members instead. I dealt with this by having Altina and Kurt, who were weaker than Ash and Yuna, attack him. Finally, there was his Shuffle attack, but it was completely irrelevant.
Shuffle.
After around 25 minutes, I met the HP target and Campanella stopped holding back, wiping out the party. Meanwhile, Rain and Sharon used 2 S-Crafts to hold back Enforcer number 1, McFirebro the Powerful Inferno, or whatever his name is. The next day, New Class 7 was benched again, and Reen was joined by Alisa, Emma and Markias. Apart from Campanella, this was the first time since the Magic Knight Direwolf where I felt that I could win a notable story fight without abusing the hell out of offensive capabilities.
This one's tough.
Reen and
Be
his friends
careful.
faced the Giga Murder Crab, and yes, that's its actual name. It was a powerful enemy that could one-hit KO the entire party on turn 1.
Everyone,
However, with a bit of luck and a thoughtful defense, it's perfectly possible to defeat without S-Craft spam. All I needed was Shining to increase evasion probability and Adamantine Shield to guard against any attacks that weren't evaded.
It's
Chrono
my
Drive
turn.
and Sigma Operation were useful to get turns fast enough to recast the shields.
Sigma Operation.
I still used Impassion to restore CP and used S-Crafts because they are much more efficient than normal attacks, but it would have been perfectly possible to do without, just more tedious. I defeated another Archaism, Regenenkopf Type 2 in much the same way. However, as its name suggests, it has strong regenerative capabilities, so I decided to end it with a Justice Bullet once it hit around 50% HP or so. In another part of the Geofront, Reen, Alisa and Markias had to defeat a Magic Knight Zelsheim, while Emma and Theo were busy tracking Ouroboros. This was the hardest fight of the... It could heal for around 1/6 of its HP at any point, so quick damage output was imperative. At the same time, it hit hard, so defense needed to be taken care of as well. And that with only 3 characters and without Theo's Brave Order. The only way I could manage that was with a weaker version of the Sledgehammer Windblade technique, using Alisa's Radical Design and Markias' Sigma Operation instead. I suspect it may be possible to exploit its slight susceptibility to delay, but I couldn't do it unfortunately. Having tracked Ouroboros to Stargaze's tower, Reen and his friends embarked there together with the traveling bard Olivier Lenheim. The latter had a fixed Master Quartz, so I couldn't use him. On the way up the tower, the team was confronted by a living armor. Funnily enough, this boss could be petrified. Petrification is by far the most useful status effect in the game, since it is effectively a one-hit KO, but unlike the death blow effect, some enemies are actually susceptible to it, and that includes a few bosses. Having arrived at the top of the tower, Reen, Alisa and Markias faced the 2 enforcers that were holding back
Class
only a
7
little
and
bit.
the debaucherous
Both of them
prince.
inflicted melee arts damage, so Crescent Mirror was still very effective. This was complicated by the fact that McFirebro had an all-cancel attack, meaning an attack that ignores and cancels all buffs, including shields. However, the poor man's Sledgehammer Windblade technique still worked okay, despite a single S-Craft not breaking him. I had a bit of trouble with McFirebro's special burn status, but it wasn't too bad. Afterwards, McFirebro was fired up and transitioned to his second form, McFirebro the Sparking of Reed or whatever. For this fight it was important to immediately use Emma's S-Craft Palace of Eregion for protection against his opening S-Craft, Prominence Eruption or something like that. Afterwards, I broke him with Radical Design and some S-Crafts, then finished the job with a Link attack.
Here. An opening.
The chapter ended with more dolls and cryptic lines. On the free day, Reen visited Einhell Keep with Frankie, and then Alisa and Sharon. No big deal with an S-Craft or 3. Reen also challenged Jessica to a duel at the Barrage Campus, and this fight was hilariously easy compared to the rest of the playthrough. There was no way to change Jessica's setup, so her stats were the same as they would be in a regular playthrough. With Shining, Earth Pulse and Crafts, Jessica ended the fight very quickly.
That was good.
Thanks, instructor.
Later that day, New Class 7 visited Einhell's level 3. The boss of the level dealt physical and arts damage, but Shining and Crescent Mirror negated most of it. One time it froze itself thanks to Arts Reflect, but otherwise the fight was unremarkable. Now in their third field exercise, Class 7 encountered a Supreme Giant Eye support.
Strong.
This was the first time where I used Altina's Brave Order Ebon Crest to negate all damage. I also broke it twice just by stacking Break Quartzes. Otherwise I simply hit it with S-Crafts and regular attacks. Nothing interesting. Next, New Class 7 ambushed some purple Jägers. I broke them twice with S-Crafts to get some time to cast Adamantine Shield and buff Reen and Yuna, then finished them with normal attacks.
Oh, pity.
Reen and the gang tracked Jäger activity to the mountains in the north, then intercepted a group of palette-swapped Jägers. I defeated them in much the same way, except I relied more on Ebon Crest. I also had a bit more luck with status effects. Status effects, by the way, are very useful in CS3, at least for field encounters. I already argued that Petrification is the best status effect. Now I'll add that Nightmare and Faint are almost as useful. They take out the target for multiple turns, guarantee at least one crit, Nightmare causes a random status effect when waking up, and many enemies are reasonably susceptible to both statuses. While most enemies do have a low susceptibility to many status effects, equipping multiple effect quartzes makes it likely that at least one will succeed despite that. Even for immune enemies, status quartzes are useful since they boost strength too. The best character for inflicting status effects is Yuna. She has many open slot lines, and in her gunner mode she can hit multiple targets at once without CP cost.
Impossible.
Afterwards, Reen had a night out with the girls and fought a Great Abyss. Sarah, Claire and Angelica had fixed Master Quartzes, but since it was impossible to remove any of them from the active party, they were all fair game.
An opening.
A few normal attacks, crafts and Reen's S-Craft brought the monster to 50% HP and it summoned 7 Abyss Worms. This seemed scary at first, but 6 of them died to a single S-Craft and just 2 more finished the deal.
That make you feel all tingly?
The next day, New Class 7 continued their field exercise and decided to duel Wallace Bardius. For the first fight, I had Altina and Musa in support and Ash and Yuna on the offensive. Wallace dealt only physical damage and was too slow to keep up with 2 artisans, so Shining and Adamantine Shield negated almost all of his attacks. His defeat was only a matter of time. In the duel between Wallace and Reen, a true evasion tank made its first appearance. I had equipped Reen to get his base evasion up to 50%, and with Shining he evaded every single of Wallace's attacks. I cornered him at the edge of the map so that Reen's counters would push him out of range, and then watched him dig his own grave.
Take this.
I also used Spirit Unification as that increased Reen's counter damage.
Take this. I was foolish.
Later that day, New Class 7 tracked Millium to the Soul Shrine on Brionia Island and were met by the Stahlritter.
Wait.
I got a lot of use out of Ebon Crest and focused on Enea and Duvali first. I broke them in order to replenish BP and keep Altina's Brave Order active, and soon enough both of them were down. Ines, however, has incredible survivability. She has a short delay craft that gives her full guard and replenishes HP by almost 9000 points for 5 turns. It's more or less the same thing I did to Aurelia back in Chapter 1. Anyway, having her outnumbered 4-1, the winner was set from the start, and after 15 minutes she lost 2. I think I could have done it faster if I hadn't made some mistakes, but oh well. The Stahlritter were saved by Ironrod, the 7th pillar of Ouroboros, and Reen, in a rare display of absolutely not holding back, summoned Valimar to fight her.
What?
Unfortunately, she countered with an Ion, and Reen had to meet her one-on-one. This scared the hell out of me, and I cheesed the fight, negating her damage with Ebon-Crest and using Brave Seeds obtained by fishing to replenish PP, until Ironrod decided she had had enough. The next day, everyone woke up to the fire of railway guns stolen by Ouroboros. Reen, Gaius Jusis, Millium and Sarah took a long trip through the long adopted canyon to find them. On the way they encountered not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not even 5, but 6 groups of Jägers and their Cougars. It's a straight path with 6 pretty much identical fights and almost nothing in between. It is by far the most tedious part of the playthrough, and that includes more than 10 hours of grinding. I bloody hate this section. If you want to see the fights, feel free to check out the uncut version, but I am done with this. At Juno Naval Fortress, Aurelia, the absolute legend, one-shot a cryptid and then joined the party, though owing to her fixed master quads I wasn't allowed to use her unbettered. New Class 7 soon encountered 2 Sleipnir units on their way to the top. I conserved their resources and took it slowly, protecting the party with Adamantine Shield and Shining, and I used mostly normal attacks. At some point, Yuna petrified one of the units, demonstrating again the superiority of that status effect. Immediately after the archaisms were down, Ines and Enea challenged the students. It was only necessary to reduce either Ines's or Enea's HP to below 30%, so I naturally focused on the weaker Enea. With Ebon-Crest, defensive arts and a few S-crafts, the fight wasn't any trouble. Reen's team then rescued New Class 7 and further ascended the castle. Near the top they were assaulted by another group of Jägers. I knew that a more difficult fight would come up soon after, so rather than nuking them with S-crafts, I took them out more slowly despite being annoyed as hell by this type of encounter. I can't say much about the strategy I used, because I'm not sure I really had any. I tried to stay alive with Sarah and Gaius on support duty, as well as Millium's white decoration, but apart from that I just hit them with Reen's and Millium's S-crafts whenever possible, just without using CP recovery items. This was made easier by the fact that I now had a true gladiator build for CP recovery over time.
An opening!
The next fight was the hardest boss fight, going up against Ironrod and her Stahlritter at the same time. I cheesed the fight with an even more overpowered variant of the Sledgehammer Windblade technique. I broke the 3 Stahlritter with 2 S-crafts and Gaius' Sacred Roar, and then used Sarah's Lightspeed Flash to AT advance the entire party. I would then use the newly gained turns to restore BP by attacking the broken enemies and repeat. Often Lightspeed Flash wouldn't give enough turns to regain all BP needed to reactivate it before Ironrod would get a turn, but by that point I had already gotten access to the most useful art in the game. Chronoburst straight up gives the caster 2 turns back to back. It can be used to instantly cast an art, but with 0 delay after an S-craft. Any character with enough EP to cast it twice can act without anyone else getting even a single turn, provided you have enough EP recovery items. Chronoburst doesn't so much break the game as vaporize it into a cloud of plasma. Eventually most Stahlritter were down, then I broke Ironrod with another S-craft and finished the fight unscathed. More dolls and cryptic lines later, the chapter was over. Altogether, there were 9 mandatory fights against Jägers and or their Cougars. 2 out of 5 would not recommend. The chapter began with 3 somewhat difficult fights. In the first, Reen and Gaius faced a group of 3 Scalypteras. The fight was made difficult by the fact that Gaius didn't have an S-craft and the enemies inflicted blindness. Rather than reload and equip appropriate accessories like some kind of smart person, I kept restarting until the RNG was nice to me. I used Reen's Ogre mode quite often because that removed all negative status effects. Reen and Gaius' Link support, where they defend the other and take less damage themselves, was also very helpful, if not completely reliable. The second fight was a mid-boss in Einhell Keep with just new class 7 Soul Reen. It was the first and only fight where I used offensive arts with great success. With a bit of bell stacking and Reen's Divine Song, Musa annihilated the Rainbow Drome with rapid-fire Shadow Spears. Afterwards, Reen, Laura, Sarah and Fi witnessed Aurelia formally surpassing Victor and were challenged to a friendly battle. Sarah was in the party, and that could only mean one thing.
Light speed flash!
I was complacent.
Most impressive.
The final field exercise took place in and around Heimdallr. There were quite a few fights, but none of them are very interesting. Eventually, Class 7 encountered a few Night-Touched members of the Calvadian Hercules squad and entered the fortress housing True Zoro Akrura, the currently awakening greatest cryptid in existence. The fights against Night-Touched on the way inside were numerous and tedious, but many of them are indicative of how I handled field encounters, so if that seems interesting to you, you should study the uncut versions. Down in the depths of the Dark Dragon's Den, Reen and his friends decided to advance on the Dynastor within. In the first stage, Yuna, Fi, Markias and Kurt got it down to 70% HP with 4 S-Crafts. Sarah, Alisa, Ash and William got it down to 40% HP with 4 more S-Crafts during the second stage. Reen, Laura, Eustace and Altina took care of the rest.
Powerful enemy. Exercise caution.
Altina's Ebon Crest and Eustace's Platinum Shield, as well as the usual defensive arts, ensured their survival, while Laura was on the offense with CP recovery accessories and S-Breaks. Crescent Mirror helped against its high-level arts, Shining let everyone evade most of its attacks including an all-cancel one, and Shields mostly negated the rest. I also did a round of S-Breaks just after activating Ebon Crest, because the long delay afterwards doesn't matter when everyone is fully protected from all forms of damage. At some point the cryptid entered its enhanced state, but that really didn't matter.
I'll assist.
Shortly after the defeat of the dragon that destroyed Heimdallr 800 years ago, definitely not Crow wanted to duel Reen.
How about a battle? There!
He did purely physical damage, and the only way to respond was with evasion, of course. While he did have an S-Craft that ignored evasion, it could be blocked with Adamantine Shield.
My mind is clear.
Thanks to Class 7, the Heimdallr Summer Festival could start as planned, but Reen just had to try and help some kid in the underground instead of enjoying it. This section had many guest characters and a lot of powerful bosses. Fortunately, one of the guest characters was Lecter. Lecter had a craft with a random effect on a random combatant. It could buff or heal a party member, debuff an enemy, or it could do 100% HP damage to them. So please take it away, Lecter.
Yeah, is this your card? Is this your card? Is this your card? Too bad for you. Too bad for you. Too bad for you.
The optional final boss of the chapter was the cryptid Megidoradon. The cryptid had a ton of HP and hit hard, but it didn't heal and was also quite slow, so a defensive approach with the usual arts and orders worked well enough. Finally celebrating the summer festival and defeat of the Dark Dragon, Class 7 ended the chapter on a high note with a delightful little party where nothing bad happened. The first fight of the chapter was a duel between Aurelia and Ogre Reen.
Give it your all.
Aurelia did only purely physical damage, which is a real rookie mistake to be honest.
Take this! Take this!
Well done.
Take this!
Well done.
Take this!
Well done.
Take this!
Well done.
Well done.
A few cryptids later, the crossed bell rang once again, summoning the Graal of Erebos. Class 7 sneaked in and immediately encountered Aryenrod the Lance Lady and McFirebro the light-emitting diode. Laura, Gaius and Emma wanted to fight them and Reen joined.
Let's have some fun, Ashen Kid!
This fight was only the second where Gaius' S-Craft was available, so I just had to use it. His S-Craft has the highest rating of all and delays every enemy, even bosses who are completely immune to any other form of delay.
In my spear!
I gave him the best CP recovery accessory, had Emma and Reen repeatedly use Chrono Burst to store for time, and kept delaying Aryenrod and McFirebro indefinitely.
Howling Heavens!
7 Howling Heavens and 3 Radiant Phoenix Blades later, the fight was over with Class 7 unscathed.
Impressive.
Seriously?
The next group of enemies was the bargain bin of characters who don't really fit in any other group. Sarara was a required party member for the battle, and you know what that means, right?
Scatter your foes. Light speed flash.
Careless! Bat it off!
Next up was the hardest boss of the Ironbloods, who are fast, hit hard, and could heal and buff each other.
How about a little fire?
Remember when Lecter one-shot every single boss in the Heimdallr Catacombs? Well, he could do it to Class 7 now, not even Death Blow immunity helped. Rufus could cast high-level arts, and his S-Craft is arguably the strongest in the game, hitting the entire field and causing all cancel. Athena's Ebon Crest was unavailable for obvious reasons, so there were only 2 ways forward. Survive the S-Craft somehow, or cheese the fight with Chrono Burst and S-Craft spam. I chose the more painful option. I used Emergency Puppets as a safety net in response to Electra's one-shot craft and Rufus' S-Craft, and avoided most damage, including Electra's Milliams and Claire's S-Crafts, with a triple layer of shields. First, Shining to evade most regular attacks and crafts. Second, he uses his Platinum Shield to block most attacks that weren't evaded. Third, Adamantine Shield and Crescent Mirror stick with both of these and provided further safety. Apart from S-Crafts, Platinum Shield was the most important craft, so users got the best CP recovery accessory. Markias was the main damage dealer and got a true Gladiator belt. Reen, Elliot and users were mainly support, but users occasionally dealt damage through a zero delay S-Craft with help of Chrono Burst, and Reen sometimes impeded the enemy. As for orders, I mainly used Sigma Operation for its speed bonus and short buff. Once Rufus went into his enhanced state, I activated Elgit's Blue Orchestra order and survived following S-Craft even without the help of emergency puppets.
Are you prepared?
Are you okay?
Thanks!
Thanks to the Seraphic Ring Art, everyone was in mint condition soon after, and the win was just a matter of time.
Weak! An opening! Take this!
This is it!
I commend you.
The path to the bottom of the Graal was finally cleared, and Reen, Yuna, Kurt and Muse faced the nameless Holy Beast. I've said this a lot before, but this boss fight might actually be the hardest in the game. It has 3 separate all-cancel attacks, it has an unavoidable attack that reduces the target's 2 on HP, it can cast high-level arts, and on top of that it is fast, likes to move, breaks the party formation with knockback, and just hits hard in general.
I was foolish.
That said, nothing can withstand Chrono Burst S-Craft spam.